see.
Hey, how you doing?
Yeah, back to Trip Chat today with Alexander from Experienced Travel Tours. So, how are you doing?
Hi guys, yeah, good. How are you?
Yeah, I had a long snap earlier. The joys of being in lockdown, you can have a nap whenever you want, and obviously being pregnant, I'm tired a lot. Um, yeah, so we said all the other times, we wanted to keep the travel bug running, like excuse the pun, and both of us are in a similar business. We have a lovely Mercedes van. You're actually the one who inspired us to get into the same groove as you are now. So we wanted to talk to you about how is it going. Obviously, currently you're not driving the van, at least not for tours, but what let's maybe what you want to first maybe say how you got into the tour guiding business, but then kind of tell us how what you miss most about not being able on tour at the moment, so that people can kind of travel through your eyes going forward.
Yeah, yeah, of course. How did I get into tour guiding? Well, it was about 14 years ago. I was working in a bank here in Edinburgh, and basically that bank wasn't going very well. It was kind of just before the credit crisis, and me and a couple of other guys that worked there, well, actually one of the other guys really led the idea that we should get out of corporate hell and get into something a bit more fun. And that was the start of my career in tourism. I then did that for a couple of years, went off to do some more other jobs in other parts of tourism. And then the last 4 years have come back to tour guiding. And to be honest with you, I kind of wish I'd never left. I love it. Love meeting interesting people from all around the world, all different walks of life. I get to see Scotland, which is of course amazing, and I get to show people our amazing history, our culture, our food, everything about the country. So I'm kind of like an ambassador, if you like, for Scotland. What's not to like?
Yeah. But then, like, see, what made you think tour guiding? Because, like, coming out of corporate, totally get it. But what made you think that's the one thing I want to do?
It was kind of a joint decision. I mean, the guy that I was working with or working for at the time, Craig, who was my old colleague at Standard Life, was very much driven it. I mean, his passion. I mean, he's been a tour guide now probably 15 years. His passion is. I mean, he's a great guy. Gets great feedback. And I kind of rubbed off on that, or that rubbed off on me, I guess, a little bit to follow that and pursue the same path. And I mean, it was crazy. I mean, we were doing crazy tours, great fun tours. I was all over the country. This was BC or before kids, so so it was.
BK, yeah.
I was on the road all the time. Obviously, now it was a little bit different with three kids, but yeah, it's I think for me the thing about Scotland is that it's not like anywhere else on the planet. I've travelled around the world, and nowhere's got the story that Scotland's got, and returning home is it's not the low at the end of a trip, it's the high at the end of the trip to get back here and get back in town.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Cool. So we've got a little list of your favourite places that you do like to take people around. That's one of the bonuses of doing what we do and making the private tours. It's all nice having our nice shiny Mercedes vans, but the bonus is with that is you can kind of do what you want or do what the client wants. You're not being chauffeured around like a bunch of cattle with 30, 40, 50 other people. You can go to these really cool out of the way places that you can't get a huge tour bus to. So yeah. One of your favourites is Duncarron. I'm going to put a photo up now.
It is. So just on that point, yeah, absolutely. So it's all private tours that we both do. And yeah, you definitely see more than you would in a bigger group, or even I would say self-driving, because of course you have then that whole element of navigation, driving, and often driving on the wrong side of the road. Whereas with us, our vans, our Mercedes vans are small enough to be able to squeeze down a lot of those single track roads through places that bigger vehicles just physically can't fit. In fact, last year I did a bus tour, the only bus tour that I've done really. And stupidly, I thought, well, we can just go down this tiny wee road to Hales Castle, which is down in East Lothian, which is probably about as far off the beaten track as you can get in a day trip from Edinburgh. And the bus driver just took one look at it and said, no way are we doing that. Definitely a big benefit of the small vans. My list of favourite places, well, this is not exhaustive, but Duncarron I just wanted to mention. So the story of Duncarron is that my sister, Helen, had been badgering me for ages to go and check out this place, Duncarron, and I'd never heard of it. And I must admit, I had assumed that it might be something of a kind of passion project. It was run by a small charity, and I somewhat discounted it until her insatiable quest for me to go and have a look at it broke the argument, and I went along, and I must admit, it's someplace. So it is.
Even the photo looks cool, like even if you're not there, it just really looks cool.
Yeah, and that is what it's like. And the guys, so it's about 20 miles south of Stirling, so smack bang in the middle of the country, and you drive along single lane roads to get to it, and when you arrive, you almost think that you might be in the wrong place because it's such an unassuming entrance, and then you kind of walk through this path, and this huge medieval or even earlier than medieval fort comes into sight, and you go through the main entrance there, and they've really grown it to have the full experience, an episode of Game of Thrones, Outlander, and in fact a lot of films, Thor, and scenes from Outlander have actually been filmed with those guys.
So do they always have like volunteers showing you around, or do you walk around yourself, or how can you make this work then?
Yeah, both. So you can have a look around yourself, or they do give you a guided tour. They'll show you some of the buildings. They've really tried to recreate what it would have been like walking into probably I would say mid 13th century fortress. And there's buildings. They're actually building new buildings at the moment. One building that you can actually, which will be kind of like the chieftain's house, which you'll be able to rent out. They're planning to put it on Airbnb. So you can actually rent it out and live and sleep there, and they have reenactors that are kind of recreating life there, and they have throughout the year, obviously not potentially so much this year, but they have throughout the year festivals and events, which I haven't been to yet, but I plan to, and they look amazing. They really look fantastic. And the thing I love about Duncarron is it's a little bit, or it tries to set itself a little bit further back in history than what I would consider to be popular Scottish history.
Yeah, because it's 11th century, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, actually, arguably, you could say that this goes back a lot further.
Yeah.
I mean, hill forts and crannogs almost exist in prehistory. Oops, sorry. But they, I would say it's like walking back into about the 11th century or even 10th century. So before the Scottish Wars of Independence, before William Wallace, Robert the Bruce, all of those guys, and see what life was like back then.
What's been your the most the usual reaction of tourists? Because your main market would be Americans, I suppose. Well, obviously English speaking world, but like mainly Americans. So to our experience, Americans are usually wowed by anything which is older than a couple of 100 years. So what's their reaction to that? Does that really bring them back to how it was meant to be and stuff?
Yeah, definitely say so. I mean, you're right. Americans are blown away by a lot of what we show them anyway, because everything is so old relative to the USA. But yeah, when I've taken people there, they're just like, it's so off the trail. It's normally at least during the week relatively quiet, so they have it. They're not hordes of people there, and yeah, it goes. I mean, of course, everybody's heard of Robert the Bruce King of Scots, and William Wallace, made famous obviously in Braveheart, and that's almost where the story begins for a lot of people. So to take them back that extra step gives them something a little bit more special.
Yeah, and you kind of mentioned that because we thought, what's the specialty of having a private tour, that you take with up to maybe 6 people, probably usually it's 2 people together or 4. It is about that, having a private tour of Scotland, or in this case, the area around Edinburgh. But like, you get, this is something not everyone knows about, and not everyone has been taken to. Even if the guide doesn't know about it so much, or like usually the bigger tours kind of go off the main tourist attractions, and it's so much nicer to see something off the beaten track. But did you have to persuade your customers to go there, or did they always go along with the flow and say, yeah, of course we'll do what you suggest?
Yeah, I mean, you're right. I mean, obviously, what we do or what I do is not very scripted. So the itineraries do change as we go along. I mean, the last multi-day tour that I did, which we went away up north onto Skye and up to the Northern Highlands, just within the space of a couple of hours of chatting away to the customers after I picked them up out of Glasgow, actually. It became quite clear that they were actually interested in, the history from around about 500 to about 1000 AD. And so I was able to add in 2 things to this itinerary that I had.
Yeah.
Duncarron being one of them, which just blew their socks off, of
Yeah.
course. And they'd visited megalithic prehistoric sites all over Europe. And they said that Duncarron was actually up there. And the other one was the Crannog up on Loch
Yes,
Tay.
Loch Tay.
Yeah, because they both come from similar periods.
Yeah, that's a lovely one as well.
Yeah.
So say, again, mainly what you offer is day tours from either Glasgow or Edinburgh. Obviously, you do multi-day tours as well. But for today's chat, we kind of concentrated on day tours that can be done from Edinburgh. So there's your favourite loch has been featured in one of our shows before. So what's that? Which one is that? And let's show a little picture while we speak about it.
Yeah, so Loch Lomond is my and quite a few people's favourite.
You're not the only one, yeah.
Yeah, I'm not the only one. I think why is Loch Lomond my favourite loch? Well, I have a lot of personal connection to Loch Lomond. I've got family that live there. My aunt Sheila, for example, lives down on Loch Lomond, just near Drimmen. And in fact, she's got an interesting connection to Rob Roy McGregor, because her house was actually gifted to a redcoat, so a British Army soldier who was involved in the oppression of the Jacobites. And many, many years later, my family bought it. And actually, when they were doing renovations, they found in the stone work of the properties, it was quite a traditional croft-style house, stone farmhouse. And they actually found materials like a kern stone, which is something that you would use to mix flour and wheat, etc., which was dated about 1000 BC.
Wow.
Various different armors. They found the remains of what would have been an early musket when they were renovating the house. And all this has got a direct connection, obviously, to quite a famous Scottish character, Rob Roy McGregor, who lived not far from Loch Lomond, up at Balquhidder, where he's buried, is not far as the crow flies from this location. And I just think the natural landscape. No offence to Loch Ness. Obviously, Loch Ness is a very famous loch, thanks to a certain monster. But I would say Loch Lomond actually gives you a lot more to look at. You've got Ben Lomond, which is a Munro mountain that stands on the east bank. There's loads of nice places to eat. The villages at Luss and Balmahar are very picturesque. In fact, Luss normally, again, not this year, but normally Luss is actually suffering from the over-tourism problem because there's so many people now visiting it.
Yeah.
And if you want, you can take a wee boat trip and enjoy.
We've got the little harbour of Luss up on the screen at the moment, the photo you supplied us there with the nice little boathouse and the cafes there. It is almost, what we call it, cookie tin. You know, it's almost perfect.
It is, yeah, it is. It's picture postcard, and it's also on the main road north, which is great because it's accessible, but it does cause, you know, in the high summer, I think that photo, in fact, I've got it here, I don't think that photo, yeah, that's pretty quiet for Luss.
Yeah, that's true, yeah.
Yeah.
I always, like, you know, for German clients, because German gardens usually have the little Smurfs, you know, or like garden gnomes. And obviously, everyone's making sure that their garden has something interesting to look at. So that I always say that's the Scottish version of a garden gnome colony in Germany. So that they obviously love going around. But I guess, you know, for someone living there, I guess your auntie doesn't have that so much. I wonder how it is, you know, if you've got hordes of tourists every day walking past your house, inspecting your garden and your front yard. But at the same time, they're used to it, I suppose. You know, there's a way of living with that as well.
Well, I've spoken to a few locals about this over the years that I've been up there. It is a double-edged sword because, of course, tourism brings in money to the economy there and a lot of jobs. But yeah, I mean, there's people looking in the windows, there's people looking at the gardens. Unfortunately, not all tourists are as respectful of people's privacy as others. Yeah. What can you do?
I just always hope that basically, given that we're now all, you know, kind of forced to learn about social distancing, that everyone kind of rethinks their behaviour anyway. So that I hope that going forward, that kind of tourism will never really come back to that extent anyway, that people like kind of go too close to things and edge up too hard, because I do think, you know, that we've learned something there, I hope. Because, yeah, peeking into someone's window is never a nice thing. You would never do that in your own house, or you would never want anyone to do that in your own house either, would you?
Sorry.
Okay, so Balmahar, you said you normally stop in Balmahar, don't you? Or do you always like stop in Luss, or you do whichever works best for the itinerary?
Yeah, it depends on a day trip out of Edinburgh. Balmahar is much more accessible. So yeah, I would normally go to Balmahar, normally have a late lunch at the Oak Tree Inn in Balmahar, which is a really nice little restaurant there on the water at Balmahar. And then head back east towards Edinburgh.
Yeah, and you'd obviously stop in Stirling. You said Stirling is one of your favourite, you know, one of the main attractions. And I'm totally with you on that, you know, given it's just something special about it. So we'll put the picture up of Stirling Castle now and tell us what your take on why do you love stopping there.
So
we've got the exterior
for similar
first.
Reasons too. Oh, sorry.
The exterior is up first.
Okay, cool. So yeah, well, Stirling Castle is probably the most, or one of the most significant and important castles in Scottish history. And the great thing about Stirling, as they say, Scotland has over 1,000 castles that you can visit, but Stirling is fantastic because it's one of the biggest and it's also intact. So when you walk through the gates at Stirling Castle, it is like walking into 15th century Scotland. And you know, you can just imagine people like King James V, Mary Queen of Scots, walking through the Great Hall and the palace, the private quarters, as the buildings that you walk through today are very similar, albeit renovated versions of the buildings that they would have existed in. So to be able to tell that story, and of course there's so many different tales about what happened there, all the way through from, I mean, the earliest recording of a settlement at Stirling Castle comes from when St Columba came to Scotland, you know, and brought Christianity to Scotland, all the way through to the Jacobites. So really contemporary history up to the late 1700s. And Stirling Castle has a story to tell in each part of those periods in history. So yeah,
we'll put up the interior, because you were saying the renovation. That's what's so impressive about it for people now, I do think, you know, even for foreign language tourists, because the way they've they're not only just, they renovated it, but they're also like reenacting it almost. You've got this lovely picture of what's her name? Claire, I think. Oh, she never actually says her name. She doesn't like that.
It's one of the ladies in waiting in the Queen's chamber there.
Yeah.
Yeah, that is in the Queen's inner chamber, in the bedchamber, I think that also. And yeah, I mean, I mean, the reenactors are fantastic because they make they're good fun. You know, they love engaging with the people, and they tell a bit of the history.
Yeah, and it sort of brings us again to a point. I mean, we've talked about it before, and you've said it's something that's quite interesting to you, is the whole should you or shouldn't you rebuild castles and actually turn them into like Stirling, where you can walk along and they look like they would have done back in the day. You know, some of the castles like Linlithgow or Blackness, they're just a big open ruin, which still is quite atmospheric and really cool. But then you've got the ones like Edinburgh and Stirling that they've actually pretty much rebuilt them on the inside. I mean, they don't really look as accurate because all the wood and the painting's all nice and new and modern, but you still try and get that sort of feel for what they would have been like back in the day, instead of just having to rely on an information board or a photo or a guidebook. So there's a weird balance. I know it's something that you'd like to talk about as well.
Aye, it is. I think there's two schools of thought. I'm of the school of thought that more should be renovated, rebuilt. You know, when you go to Edinburgh Castle, less so actually, because it still is a serving military barracks. But when you go to Stirling Castle, when you go to Elan Castle, which was renovated in the early 1900s by up until the Second World War, that is, I mean, I would say Elan is almost a better example.
We'll just quickly bring that picture up, Elan. Everyone will know it. Yeah. It's like the most iconic castle in Scotland, really.
Yeah.
Yeah, the most photographed castle in Scotland, self-proclaimed. So you can get a really, really good feel for what life would have been like there, because you're walking through the same environments that these people would have been walking through. Then you have the ruined castles, and there is something to be said for preserving a castle in the state that the heritage organisation found it. But a lot of the castles were destroyed by vandalism. Either state-sponsored vandalism or just decay over the years. And I have heard the feedback a lot of times from people, and it is also my view that it would be nice to see some more of these reconstructed and brought back to their former glory.
Yeah, but then it depends. As long as it's done, tastefully and properly. You don't want to have it turned into a Madame Tussauds.
No.
You go to places like Warwick Castle now, which is part of the Tussauds group now, and it's turned into almost like a Disneyland. So you also got to get that balance as well.
Well, Alnwick Castle strikes a good balance, I think, because Alnwick Castle, which is in England, of course, across the border in Northumberland, but the Percys, the family that own it, have done, I think, quite a good job of striking a balance between theatre almost and that kind of theme park feel and the history. And of course, Alnwick is.
I suppose it makes a difference if someone still lives in the castle, at least part time, or someone, if it's actually not been owned for quite a long time by anyone. And I do think, some people who actually live in their house, they might not even want visitors. So it's kind of, so say for example Inverary Castle obviously is completely lived in, even though
Yeah.
obviously they have one part which is open to visitors and others aren't not. So I do think it's yeah, mainly down to money really, because National Trust doesn't have the funds to kind of reopen everything. So on the other hand, you have to kind of point out how impressive it actually is that they managed to kind of make Stirling such a place where it's been brought to life really, because it was a vast, like I don't know how many, like I know it opened about 8-9 years ago, but how long did they actually work on that project to get it to where it is now?
Stirling Castle.
Yeah, the renovation was probably more than 2 years, don't you think?
Oh yeah, it was, and it was more than 8 or 9 years ago now, because
It
I
was.
went to an open air screening of Braveheart at Stirling Castle, and Braveheart must be the best part of 20 years ago.
Yeah, at least.
Oh
Yeah.
no, I meant when they reopened the new version. I was still at Visit Scotland, so it must have been like 9 years or 10 years ago, when they after they finished the renovations and they started.
Right, okay, yeah, maybe, no, yeah, it must be, well, if you, yeah,
We better
maybe,
not. Please Google it. Something around that.
renovated many times, many times. Yeah, maybe. I mean, certainly the big renovation, which I mean, the most
Of the
striking
palace.
change when they painted the Great Hall,
Yeah.
the golden color again, the cream gold color, and
Yeah.
that was, yeah, that's easily 20 years ago.
That could be true, yeah. So you've got another castle which you like to talk about, and that's Hunting Tower Castle. So we'll put the picture up.
Yeah, well, Hunting Tower Castle is another one of those kind of off the beaten track, but actually really accessible castles. It is just near Perth, in Hunting Tower. The town is named after the castle, and it is just a really interesting example of a tower house that was extended, and has lots of local history, but also some bigger Scottish history. Again, connections to Mary Queen of Scots. And yeah, it goes back. Well, it was originally constructed. The first tower house was constructed 15th century, and then it was extended in the 15. I know this 1530, 1540.
Yeah.
And then again, all the way through to modern or relatively recent history into the 1600s, 1700s, and the family that owned it, the Earl of Gowrie, who is connected to. He is connected to well, basically the family histories in Perthshire, and then how the castle was eventually taken, and then the involvement, again, strong Jacobite presence in that part of
Oh yeah, yeah,
northwestern
yeah.
Perthshire. Um, but again, just one of these off the beaten track, semi. Still a lot of original features. For example, Hunting Tower has got a beautiful original painted ceiling. And at the risk of sounding like I'm a member of Ceilings Anonymous, there's nothing better than a good roof. Um,
Yeah.
Stirling Castle again. Stirling Castle. You've got the heads of Stirling in the palace at Stirling Castle, and Hunting Tower actually has something almost more impressive because it's original. It's not a recreation, as the heads are. But and you're half a mile from the main roads to Inverness, so easy for people to visit, but so few people do visit it.
It's not
Yeah.
one of the big ones, and that's always the thing, isn't it? Like, so for example, we like to go to Kelly Castle near St Andrews, and that's not usually that visited
No.
as other places. So it is. There are so many more. Obviously, yes, Scotland is the land of the castles and mansions and houses and towers, because all the big families, they had to have all these houses all dotted all over the place, because for every season they had to have a house matching the season, so to say. So that's why they're all still there. But you can also understand why so many of them are now derelict, because even the richest families, they couldn't hold it. Like if they had too many kids to pass them on to, then suddenly it became a difficulty to kind of who do you give it, or can you pay out your siblings. That's the main story you hear in most of them, don't you?
And a lot of them come down to tax as well. You know, people would, you know, you'd tear the roof off so you wouldn't have to pay tax on an inhabited building, and then, you know, of course, you end up with the water comes in and everything gets ruined. And you know, you look at the old pictures of places like Roslyn Chapel and things like that when they were just left to rot. You know, and the stone here isn't really the best for it either.
No, it's not, especially on the west coast. You know, there was a place up near Callander called Lendrick Castle. I don't know if you've ever heard of it.
Yeah.
And the owner of the castle did exactly that. He wouldn't hand it over. He wouldn't bequest it into state care, so he wouldn't give it to Historic Scotland or the National Trust. And it kept on. It became less and less sound as a building. And then one day he knocked it down, and the council, the local authority, the local government got wind of this, went along and inspected what had happened, and found the building completely ruined. And he actually went to jail for that because it was a protected building. And he had effectively, even though it was his own property, he had effectively vandalised a national monument, and he did jail time for it. And quite right too.
I know conserving old, conserving, you know what I meant. There is a lot to be said for it, because, you know, some people put their heart and soul into it. You know, Wester Hales, for example, she was forever running around with her glue tube trying to get all the little mussel shells to be sticking back on, and then others, like you said, they took a more selfish approach to it and just hoped it would rot away and they could demolish it. And I guess 100 years ago, even in the 60s, they'd still demolished things. They were more, you know, blasé about it, whereas nowadays we're like, oh my God, why would you ever do that? You know, so I think actually with Sir Walter Scott, we have to thank him a lot, because I do think his actions kind of preserved a lot of buildings, because he was making sure that people knew how important history is and how important like historic buildings are. So there's always been a phase of it went up and it went down, how people kind of cared about what they find in their local environment, really.
Well, Sir Walter Scott, absolutely. I think what Sir Walter Scott did, or one of many things that Sir Walter Scott did, was he commercialised the Scottish story.
Yeah.
He sold the romance and the thrills and the intrigue of Scottish history to the Victorians, and told the Victorians that we weren't all just crazy marauders up here, that we, you know, if you came to Scotland, you weren't going to lose your head. And I would actually attribute him with kickstarting what I would describe as the modern Scottish tourism industry.
Yeah, I think you're right with that, and sometimes you have to roll it back a bit. So I have lots of Glaswegian tour guide friends who say the tours are always taken aback that they don't speak Gaelic, and they're trying to explain, I'm sorry, I'm a lowlander and we don't really speak Gaelic. And I do feel, you know, that the way people even nowadays see Scotland is almost through Walter Scott's lenses, isn't it? And, you know, it's all Highlanders and the Highland glory and all of that, which is, you know, too right. He pointed that out, but people forget there's more than one side to every story.
As long as they don't always go by Hollywood, you know, Hollywood's also responsible for so much false news. You know, you look at Braveheart where he's got his face painted blue, and it was like, no.
I noticed actually, I did laugh to myself. I was on tour up on the Royal Mile. God, it feels like a lifetime ago now. It was probably February. And there's a guy that stands on the top of the Royal Mile. You'll know who I'm talking about. I can't remember what his name is, but he always used to say that he was a direct descendant of William Wallace, and that he would dress in what he described as a typical outfit of a warrior from the period. But obviously somebody had a word in his ear, because he did have the blue and white face paint, as is, of course, in Braveheart. And somebody obviously tipped him off that actually nobody had worn that kind of face paint in Scotland for about 800 years before Battle of Stirling Bridge, which is the battle that's
You
very
refer to,
loosely
yeah.
depicted in yeah.
In the big green field in Ireland, yeah.
Yeah,
We've got
yeah.
one more castle that you wanted, or no, Linlithgow. What was that?
That's just him and and the beast.
I see. So yeah, we thought that in the teaser. But let's show Alexander in action.
There
That's
you are.
you in front of Linlithgow Castle with your lovely van, and that's a young you. How old is that
hair.
picture?
No, that was last year, 2 years
Was it
ago.
really?
No, last year. Unless I've sent you the wrong picture.
No. That's only 2 years
do you-
ago. Okay, cool.
Oh, you have the one from 13, 14 years ago as well.
I remember you put that on Facebook where you compared the two. That's true, actually.
Yeah.
Yeah, you lost your hair to a challenge, didn't you?
I have lost my hair to a challenge now.
Yes.
It's called old age.
Yeah, my kids shaved all my hair off a couple of weeks back. It is growing back slowly. But yeah, no, the young me at Linlithgow Palace is when I first started, which is 14 years ago. And obviously I haven't aged a day.
No.
Between there and the more recent photo, although actually the two are very similar, and of course Linlithgow Palace hasn't changed a bit.
Yeah, but it's good to point out, when you book Alexander, you will always get your man in a kilt, maybe with hair, with no hair, you never know which challenge has been on, and that's the van you would get to be driven around in, so that's always good to know.
Which is another bonus with having the nice vans, is you can actually get right up to some of the palaces and castles, which, with the big tours, you don't have that opportunity. So,
well, you can. I mean, that photo at Linlithgow Palace. I mean, you can drive right through the Peel there, into the palace grounds. And to be honest with you, I wouldn't want to attempt that in anything bigger than the vans that we.
Yeah,
you better not.
Challenge accepted.
No, you better not. Okay, so we're way over the time, so it's really lovely chatting to you, even though we probably hear from you a lot more because we work together quite closely. But it was nice to hear your version of Scotland, really, like what you like to. It's just always nice, and I hope our viewers enjoyed it too, to get some insights on your favourite spots, Alex's favourite spots. Is there anything you want to add just before we let you go?
No, I don't think so. Thanks for having me. And I suppose I just hope, for everybody's sake, for you, me, all the tourism industry in Scotland, and also for tourists who are visiting us, let's hope that we can get bounce back from the whole Corona situation when it's safe to do so. And please, anybody that's watching, come to Scotland. It's great, and you can be shown around by Sean, Beryl, and myself.
Yes.
You get lots of isolation and social distancing because everything's out in the middle of nowhere.
Yes.
And we know the places to get you to. That's very true. Very true. Well, thank you, Alexander, and we'll quickly plug for next week. So on Tuesday we have one of our blogger friends, Bjorn, talking to you. Bjorn has been traveling the world for, I don't know, probably 10 years now.
Yeah.
He's been taking pictures. He's been taking challenges. Yeah,
Yes.
Alex will. You'll blush because the stuff he did all over the world. It was
Crazy Belgian.
I know. He learned to play the guitar. He learned languages. He drove bicycles along the Orient. Anyways, he's now starting a new project, trying to make all of that into a big book, and we're going to speak to him on Tuesday. So that will be Tuesday.
And his trusty Volkswagen. Well, we call it a combi. Big hippie-mobile, the sunshine vehicle. But you'll see that as well. And don't forget to, trying to get my finger there, make sure you keep an eye on us on Facebook and on YouTube. Subscribe, please. And we will keep these coming through while we're all stuck at home.
Yeah.
I've been a bit lazy. I'll get more pictures and photographs and little quirky stories about Edinburgh and Scotland online as well. So keep your eye on Instagram and on Facebook. But we'll see you on next Tuesday at midday UK time.
Super.